The first one I'm going to introduce to you is Connor Coyne. He is a writer of weird and ghostly things. I'm assuming that's his description of his work. He's written novels, short stories, plays, essays, poetry, and prose poems. His background is as unique as his work, but don't take his word for it. You need to see why he believes that radioactive ultraviolet is the best color, and why he does not believe that a good story should have a beginning, middle, and end.
Oh, wow.
Ladies and gentlemen, Connor Coyne.
And his wine.
Well, I'm going to make one little quick clarification on that last point. There are lots of great stories that have beginning, middles, and ends. It's not a prerequisite. You can have a perfectly great story that is none of those things. All right. Let me just get out my little cheat sheet real quick, because I do not trust my memory on this little slate. Well, yeah. First, just it's obvious, but I think it needs to be said. Thank you to Rhonda, and thank you to Jessica, who can't be here today, for putting this together. This has been, regardless of the turnout, which is a non-controllable factor, everything that can be controlled here has been fantastic, and this is a wonderful shop. And I think that Flint's survival and thrivingness depends on this sort of business, this sort of event. So I'm very proud to be involved in this. And see, in a year or two, when this thing is flooded, when there are like a standing room back to that back door, I'm gonna say, yeah, bitches, I was here with you. Okay, I got shut up. All right. So there's that.
I like that.
For a year now, I've been plugging my novel, Hungry Rats, all over the place, and I've got copies of that. It's dark, grisly, experimental, second-person noir. If you're interested in that, but I'm doing something different tonight. I'm doing something for the first time. I'm very excited about it. So if you got questions about Hungry Rats, I'm happy to answer them. But that's not what I'm sharing right now. I'm going to open this with a little bit more of a sales pitch than I usually do, because this is a kind of an experiment. See, I'm the sort of person who, if I try to write something quickly, it's usually not particularly good. The ideas I do that become good are ideas that I think about them for 2-3 years, then I try them, and they're not any good. So I think for another 2-3 years, and usually after I'm about 7-8 years in, then I can start doing good stuff, and it happens very quickly then. But there are other ways to write, and I wanted to try one out. And coincidentally, there has been an explosion of new publishing technology, print on demand, electronic books. You've got the Kindle and now its competitors with the iPad and the Nook and so forth. These are not just things that make fads that make reading a little bit more interesting or novel or cater to a specific group. This is changing the way literature is disseminated and received and critiqued. It's changing what's being written. And I want in on that because I like to write weird and ghostly things. And there's nothing weirder or ghostly than what's happening right here. So what I'm kind of saying in a long-winded way is the novel I'm working on right now is a serial. I've tried writing this book 2 other times, and it's been unmitigated shit both times. This time, I was like, okay, the pressure's on. I'm coming out with 2 chapters, about 10,000 words every week. Every week, I've been getting about 4 or 5 hours of sleep at night because in addition to watching my daughter and keeping my house, I've been writing this thing, I've been sending it off to an editor, I've been getting a graphic designer to do a separate cover for me every week, and so far, not to be too modest, it's freaking awesome. So, if you've got a Kindle, you can read it for 99 cents an issue. The whole thing is going to be $8 when you add them all up. If you don't have a Kindle, you can get one for free for your Mac or for your PC, and I can tell you how to do that. But the bottom line is, I challenge anybody who thinks this is an interesting process to read the first chapter. If you don't like it, you're out 99 cents. If you do like it, then you're participating in something that I'm very proud of. So I just have have two other quick little things, and then I'll just jump in, because I'm going to read from the beginning, so I don't really need to give you any context. First, Jessica had the idea that we bring in something visual to sort of accompany our reading. And I decided to go with something kind of simple. I just brought in some great examples of literature that I think are inspiring and still relevant to anybody pursuing avant-garde work in the U.S. today. So I'm just going to run through these. I'm going to set them down right there. You want to look at them, have any questions about them, just let me know. We've got Adbusters, which is notorious now, for kicking off the Occupy movement. But actually, this is an issue from a few years back, and just the way they subvert advertising through images of advertising is striking. I would describe the book I'm working on right now as being sort of a magical realism. One of my favorite examples of magical realism is this book, The Wizard of the Crow by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He's a Kenyan writer, and for being as insanely thick as it is, it's actually quite a page-turner. There's an old stalwart, Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. This thing does things with words and language that are mind-bending. And then somebody who was doing similar things about 70 years later, Juna Barnes, hugely underappreciated New York writer. But this book is like absolute poetry. It will ravish you. Anne Carson, who's another like fantastic poet and essayist, and finally Rosemary Waldrop. She's got several books out, but this is my favorite, Reluctant Gravities, and it takes a very scientifically informed approach to things like entropy and thermodynamics, and treats with them in a thoroughly poetic way. So I'm just going to put these out here if you're interested. Now, the other thing is, when I was 17, I started working on a novel that I'm still working on, and I wanted to set it in Flint, but I wanted to be able to take liberties that would not fly. So I came up with a doppelganger. It does. I call this place Archaic Michigan because I was 17 years old and I had a flair for the dramatic. And so there's this place that looks like Flint but isn't. I'm just telling you, it's basically Flint. You do not have to speculate. And if you have any questions about that, and I'm happy to answer them. All right, so I'm just going to jump in. I'm going to read the short preface and the first chapter. Well, okay.
Without further ado, Chris Reed.
Woo!
Do we have a
Yeah, right there.
should I unplug anything?
You can unplug the television.
This one.
Yep.
Should have done this earlier. Uh-oh. It's a 3-prong.
Uh-oh.
Oh well, forget it. Anyway, I also wanted to, see, I'm gonna sound like I'm bragging now, but I wanted to add that I've been writing fiction for about 8 years now. And,
Your light
oh,
right
okay.
there.
Thanks. Okay, cool. I've been writing fiction for about 8 years, and I've published about 70 stories in the small press, and I've been published alongside authors like Piers Anthony, Joe R. Lansdale, Bentley Little, Ramsey Campbell, Graham Masterton, and a lot of other best-selling authors. And the only reason I'm saying that is because since this is an authors forum, and I make comic books, I wanted to reassure you guys that I am indeed a real writer. So
Isn't that
there's that. I just wanted to make that clear. Because, comic books, they've been kind of stigmatized in our society as just little goofy books like for kids, and kind of irrelevant books that really don't mean anything. But actually, comic books are very story-based, just like any other kind of art, like novels or movies or television or anything like that. And a lot of comic books have evolved over the past few decades, and a lot of them touch on some very important, relevant social issues. Mine don't. But, actually, that's a lie. Some of mine do. But before I get into what I'm currently doing, I'd like to give a little background on myself as an artist and how I evolved as a comics artist. I was gonna do a PowerPoint, which was gonna be really kick-ass because I had a lot of cool images of like my older stuff on here, but
Not bad.
what's that? No, that's okay. But I do have a little cheat sheet here, which I'm glad I brought. A little tiny outline I dashed off at the last minute, so this should keep me on track hopefully. Well, I first started reading comic books when I was 9 years old. My grandma bought me a copy of Spidey Super Stories, and I was like instantly hooked. This was like 1980. Oh yeah, I loved it, and I wanted more comic books. I thought this is so cool. So, being from a poor family, I didn't have a lot of money. So what I'd do is I grew up on Asylum Street, just west of the Flint River, and I lived right down the street from the Chevy and the Whole plant. So what I'd do is every Saturday morning, right after cartoons, of course, I'd get my bike and my Hamity sack. Who all knows what a Hamity sack is?
Wow.
I'd get 2 Hamity sacks, double fist it, right? And I'd go down to the Chevy and the Whole plant, and I'd dig in the parking lots, and I'd dig through all the garbage cans, and I'd get out all the beer bottles and the pop bottles and things like that, and beer cans. And a lot of times the guys would be on lunch break, and a lot of people were really generous, and they'd give me their bottles and stuff, and I'd wrap the tops of the bags around the handlebars and get booking down, 2nd Street. And I'd turn my bottles in and I'd buy comic books. So that's how I funded my comics addiction. And it didn't take long for me to start actually making my own comics because I, by nature, used to be like an imitator. Whatever, when I was a kid, whatever I enjoyed, I'd imitate it, experimenting and all that. And I started writing like superhero comics and things like that. And I think 1982, so I must have been 11, I started writing a series called The Comedy Brothers, which was possibly the very first autobiographical comic ever made. I don't know how long people have been making those, but I didn't know that what I was doing was like making autobiographical comics. I was just like writing about what I did on the playground, things like that. And it ended up going like 38 issues all the way up into high school and everything, and I've still got all of them. Thank God I didn't throw them away. I threw away a lot of my old superhero comics because I reached a point where I was like 13 or 14 where I was like, oh, these are stupid, this is dumb, what am I doing? So I threw them all in the garbage. Well, shortly after that I started making them again because it was in my blood, it's what I enjoy doing. So by the time I hit 15, I discovered an artist named Gilbert Shelton. And he wrote a comic book, among others, called The Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, which was a comic about 3 potheads, drug addicts, and their encounters with the cops and urban living and things like that. And up until then, I'd only been exposed to like Marvel and DC comics, and things like that, superheroes and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, and I thought, this is amazing. Better not let my parents see me read this. So I had some of them, right? And I kept them probably, I don't remember, in my drawer or something. But every day, man, I'd take out this issue of the Freak Brothers and just read it and think, man, these guys are so cool. Look what they're doing with this bong. And, oh, they're buying all this weed. And
Yeah.
So, yes. So I started making my own version of the Freak Brothers, and I called it the Junkie Brothers. I was like, I'm going to push the envelope a little. Let's just call it what it is, right? The Junkie Brothers. So I had 3 characters, large, zit, and cute, right? And these guys are disgusting, and they just go out causing trouble, 3 issues out of that I remember vividly. I still have all these at home. I call it the Puke Political Trilogy, because the boys go to Washington, D.C., and Puke runs for president. He gets elected somehow. And
Pretty much everybody knows Tom. For most of his life, he's been a fixture in the city of Flint. Occasionally, he's escaped once or twice, but I think he got whiplashed the last time he got yanked back here. But a lot of us know him from his he's a very talented drummer and musician, and one of the best radioists that Flint's ever known. And so now he's added writer, author to his list of accomplishments. So tonight he's going to discuss his books. All I wanted was a haircut and a little off the top. And then he's going to reveal the best way to inspire oneself to write and maybe pass it around for everybody to share. So I'm looking forward to that. Tom Sumner.
Ow!
Well, I
I'm a big fan of Zap Comics.
Yes.
So I was riveted by Chris's reference to the fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. I was actually in a band once called Captain Pissgums and His Perverted Pirates. We played at the first Kent State Moratorium.
Really?
At Wilson Park, which is now kind of a parking lot, which is a whole story in and of itself. But
This is over for drinks.
they couldn't tell people on the radio who was playing at Wilson Park, which I find amazing because here it is like 30 years later and they still wouldn't be able to.
Wow.
Which is a little bit strange in and of itself. So I really appreciate that. And trying to follow somebody who actually has talent is a little bit rough. You know, I always feel a little bit weird. I've done a couple of books. I have written a couple of books, and I have some digital books that I know nothing about. They're out there, and I have no idea what they're doing or what's happening or who cares. But
That's the truth.
I'm always a little freaked out, and congratulations, by the way, to Rhonda and Mary and Stir the Imagination for moving from Holly to downtown.
Yeah.
Yay! I'm so happy you're
Love
here.
having you here.
Yes.
Even in spite of the guy who protested out front.
Wait, what?
What?
Oh, that's a story.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. I always feel a little funny. This is their first author forum, and I'm honored to be a part of it. But I always feel a little bit queasy when somebody says author. I don't think of myself as an author. I don't think of myself as the kind of creative talent that Chris is, or that Connor is, that labors and sweats over great prose and great art. I tell stories, and it's just something natural to me. It doesn't feel like something that I labor about. So I always kind of joke that I'm not so much a writer as I am a typer. Yeah, I thought about possible titles for tonight, and one of them was, I drink, therefore I write.
I love that.
Thank you. So do I.
To bite you over one night.
When I was asked to do this by Jessica Back, who is a lot of fun, we played Oscar together in different productions of The Odd Couple. She asked for props, and I was trying to think, what the hell do writers have as props? You know, they're very private, kind of quiet people. They do something, you know, late at night. You know, they wake up in the middle of the night with an inspiration, and they go to the keyboard and they start typing. So what the hell do they use? So I was trying to think, what does an author have as a prop? And it goes back to, I drink, therefore I write. So here's one prop.
Hold it up, Todd, hold it up.
Thanks for dropping by. So I will feel free to pass this around the room.
It's empty, I don't want that.
I'm not giving you the one in here.
What is
So,
it?
the other thing I
that's-
thought about
that'll
with
do it.
writers is
What is
they
it?
wear
Peppermint schnapps.
Nice.
patches on them, so I brought that.
Yes.
I'm not passing this around because it has the full one in here. And the other thing is, I always, for some reason, the word author is the thing that I'm wrestling with. Because again, like I say, I don't wrestle over my writing, I just tell stories. But when I think of the word writer, I think of the patches, I think of the booze, and a pipe.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I thought, now this is
What's
all
in it, babe?
Jessica's fault. Oh, thank
What's
you.
in it?
I'm like,
I
what's
don't
in it,
think
babe?
these are deposit returnable. but
Just give a sniff. You'll know.
That's full.
Excellent.
But you know, I think about that image of the author, someone who's somewhat pretentious because he knows things that we don't know, and he's going to write those things and tell us what to think, what to feel, what to believe, because he knows things we don't know. we all know things that other people don't know.
Mhm.
We all know things that other people don't know. For me, ain't nothing but a family thing. My parents were great communicators. I come by it honest. My parents were staffers for people in Washington who were part of the legislature back in the early 50s. They went on dates at, like, the Army McCarthy hearings. I mean, this is like
Wow.
historical
That's
stuff.
awesome.
They would take a sandwich, they would go, they would sit and they would watch, you know, Joe McCarthy trying to rail on members of what would then be the Truman administration and ultimately the Eisenhower administration. And they would tell these amazing stories. My mother tells a story about living in Washington, and staffers in those days would rent an apartment, and they'd go to work and think, this is cool, you know, I'm in Washington, I'm working for a big-time congressman or a senator or whatever. And then at the end of the term, all the legislators would go home, like for the summer, for the, you know, they'd suspend session, and then they'd all come back in the fall or whatever. So here are all these staffers with a year lease and no salary for 3 months. So they used to have what they called rent-breaking parties. This is where streaking was born. They would literally run through the lobby of their apartment buildings naked to get thrown out of their lease. So they didn't have to pay for it because they got kicked out.
Awesome.
Then, 3 months later, they come back, they start a new lease in a different apartment building. That's what they did. This is like the 1950s. Streaking didn't happen until like 25 years later. And these people were partying on that level then. My dad tells a story. My dad's grandparents met at the Michigan School for the Deaf. They were from different parts of the state. They met at the Michigan School for the Deaf, and they ended up falling in love, marrying, and bought a building which stood on Saginaw Street where the City Hall is now. My grandfather was known as the dummy cobbler in those days. And they had, how do I put this? Because of their, this is gonna sound really intelligent, their deafness. My father and his brother knew sign language years before Garrett Morris on Saturday Night Live, which predates most of you. And my dad was sitting with the owner at that time of WNEM TV5, which was based in Saginaw, as it probably still is today, but had a Flint office on the main level, on the Saginaw Street side of the Durand Hotel. And I have to check my notes, 'cause I wrote these hurriedly before I came here. My dad and Jim Garrity were sitting in a hotel in Bay City. My dad knew sign language. There was a deaf couple across the restaurant having a conversation. My dad started to snicker a little bit, and Jim Garrity said, "What are you laughing at?" He said, "Well, I probably shouldn't tell you this because I'm sort of eavesdropping on a conversation. There are these two deaf people, they're talking in sign language. Nobody in the room has any idea what they're talking about except my dad and soon to be Jim Garrity." So my dad says, "Well, he's propositioning her." And Jim Garrity says, "Well, what exactly are they saying?" He's saying, now remember, they're in the restaurant of a hotel. He's trying to get her to go upstairs right now. Jim and my dad starts interpreting to Jim Garrity this conversation as it's unfolding. Jim Garrity says, "Tell you what, you know how to speak their language. Go across the room and tell them, if she says yes, I'll pay for the room.